If you look at these two OLED TVs side by side, it's hard to believe that they were launched only 1 year apart. Such is the difference in light output between the two. But this remarkable jump in brightness is just one of 3 key benefits brought about by the new latest generation 4-stack WOLED panel implemented on the LG G5, making last year's G4, which is no slouch itself, look like an ancient plasma that does not support HDR. Thanks to its higher peak brightness, the LG G5 was able to render the 4000 nit sun in pan with greater intensity, while also preserving more highlight detail in the surrounding clouds compared to the G4. Now, some of you will feel that it's unfair to compare the G5 to an older 2024 model, but even against the Samsung S95F, a 2025 TV equipped with the latest generation QD OLED panel, the LG G5 still looked brighter on a white background in real-world HDR content while tracking the ST2084 PQ standard in an accurate manner, therefore coming closer to matching the HDR presentation on a Sony BVM-H3110 reference monitor. Those of you who are concerned about the increased brightness leading to OLED burn-in may be reassured to learn that in this test where we displayed a peak white window at full blast in HDR for 10 seconds, then switched to a full-field gray slide, the LG G5, whose 4-stack OLED module includes a heatsink, managed to clear away image retention slightly quicker than the Samsung S95F QD OLED, which is equipped with only a graphite thermal pad to dissipate heat. The second major improvement on the G5's 4-stack WOLED panel is its wider color gamut enabled by purer spectral wavelengths. Our 65-inch review unit covered 83% of Rec 2020 color space in UV terms, helping the television achieve richer saturation of high luminance colors in aggressively graded HDR titles, which are sadly becoming less common these days. Of course, QD OLED panels still offer around 90% BT 2020 coverage on paper, but the Samsung S95F's suboptimal color accuracy and 4000 nit tone mapping meant that this advantage wasn't always realized in practice, giving the LG G5 an opportunity to come close to, and occasionally even surpass the QD OLED in matching the reference monitor when displaying some of the most challenging HDR material. One exception where the superior color luminance of the S95F was clearly evident was this fleeting shot of the kryptonite spear in Batman vs Superman. So brief, I played it twice. Following the recent introduction of gamut rings measurements in Kalman, some publications have begun using them to illustrate differences in HDR color volume. However, it is important to understand that gamut rings are derived from the C-Lab color space, which operates on relative luminance, and is therefore unsuitable for PQ-based HDR where luminance is defined in absolute terms, with no less an authority than Charles Poynton arguing that gamut rings significantly overestimate the actual HDR color volume coverage. Until the method is properly standardized for HDR, we prefer to hold off on using this metric, otherwise we may be presenting potentially misleading data. With that out of the way, here are some hard numbers obtained on our 65-inch LG G5 review sample that has been run in for at least 100 hours. HDR peak brightness measured 2500 nits on a 10% window after calibration to D65 white point, and 350 nits full fill, which goes a long way towards explaining why the G5 came across so much brighter than the G4 with the appropriate HDR content. For SDR viewing, LG Electronics has introduced a gamma slider if you select 2.2, and here are the gamma targets we measured for each value, with the +2 option corresponding to 2.4 gamma, which looks exactly the same as the BT1886 setting. On a calibrated widescreen, the 4-stack WOLED panel on the G5 gave off a subtle, almost intangible warmth which approached the look of QD OLEDs, instead of a more sterile tone typically associated with previous generation WOLEDs. The LG G5 uses an O24N chipset, suggesting that it's more of a revision or continuation of last year's SoC, rather than an entirely new chip. Unsurprisingly then, the LG G5 still struggled with near black gradation in 10-bit HDR. We observed dark color nonlinearity in test patterns, some posterization in low light scenes containing smooth gradients, and even a rippling effect during fade to black or fade in from black transitions. In fact, due to panel variance, our review unit suffered from unstable blacks during the end credits of Mindhunter in Dolby Vision on Netflix, and with Kalman AutoCal support not yet available, we were not able to correct it without crushing shadow detail. While some flashing artifacts were present on this near-black moving quantization test pattern, they were rarely visible in high-quality real-world content, thanks to the detail enhancer dithering algorithm introduced by WOLED panel supplier LG Display since last year. Up close, you may see very fine diagonal lines in darker areas of a moving video, or even when you turn or tilt your head very quickly. But from a normal viewing distance of at least 3 feet away, it's generally impossible for you to see it unless you have Superman's eyes, in which case you should be out saving the world, not watching this very video. To put it into perspective, this was the surface area on our 65-inch G5 review sample from which the close-up footage of the diagonal lines was captured. A total non-issue for most people unless they are seated unusually close while using the TV as a monitor. Even with TrueMotion disabled, the LG G5 correctly performed 5.5 pull-down to present 24 frames per second movies accurately without telescenic judder. Because of OLED's near-instantaneous pixel response time, and particularly the G5's remarkable peak brightness, the 24p stutter and stroboscopic effect inherent in films may become more noticeable to certain viewers. Fortunately, LG Electronics offers a cinematic movement setting which remains the most effective motion compensated frame interpolation or MCFI among different TV brands to mitigate these issues without incurring significant interpolation artifacts or soap opera effect. For 50Hz broadcast material we get in PAL regions such as the UK, engaging TrueMotion using less aggressive values on the G5 did not introduce obvious microstutter artifacts across a wide variety of programs we watched during our review period. At first glance, LG seemed to have slightly improved the native 10-bit gradation on the G5 OLED. However, after watching tons of content against a reference monitor, there appeared to be an always active decontouring filter under the hood, even with smooth gradation set to off in the UI. We first noticed it on this paused frame from Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, where the skin imperfections on the girl's left upper arm looked less detailed than that shown on the Sony HX3110. Switching to Game Optimizer mode would nullify the decontouring filter, restoring fine detail though at the expense of 10-bit gradation. As you can see when we toggle between HDR Filmmaker mode and HDR Game Optimizer mode when examining the amount of posterization in the sky around the sun during the title sequence of Kingsman. After LG's always-on micro-contrast enhancement helped the G4 win the upscaling segment of our TV shootout last year, the company appeared to be continuing this approach on the G5, as demonstrated by the fact that even with sharpness set to 0 in Filmmaker mode, which should disable all edge enhancement, summoning the information box on our Oppo 203 4K Blu-ray player altered the moire pattern on a 2160p SDR Luma zone plate test clip, indicating that some form of dynamic sharpening was still taking place. To be clear, several television manufacturers, including Sony and this year, Samsung, have been implementing similar flavors of microcontrast enhancement or dynamic sharpening on their high-end models, which boost perceived sharpness without any apparent side effect from a normal viewing distance. However, we're genuinely concerned that this could spiral into a loudness war style scenario where in a few years' time, we are left with blatant, undefeatable edge enhancement across the board. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Otherwise, the LG G5's video processing was exemplary, suppressing jaggies effectively for video-based interlaced material, as well as correctly detecting and processing 3/2 and 2/2 cadences in film-based interlaced material with real cinema engaged by default from factory. Watched straight on, bright uniformity was very good on our 65-inch LG G5 review unit, manifesting no noticeable banding or dirty screen effect on full-field gray slides. However, please bear in mind that unlike QD OLED, which is free of color tinting even at extreme of angles thanks to its top emission design, WOLEDs, including the 4-stack panel on the G5, do take on a cyan or even pink tint depending on your viewing angle, most noticeable on a white background. In terms of dark uniformity, the 4-stack WOLED panel on our G5 sample appeared cleaner than the 5-stack QD OLED panel on our Samsung S95F review unit, both on test patterns and in real-world content, such as this dark HDR scene from June. With Game Optimizer mode engaged, input lag measured 13 milliseconds at 60 frames per second, which could be lowered to just over 9 milliseconds with boost mode enabled. At 120 FPS, input lag would drop even further to under 5 milliseconds, similar to LG OLEDs over the past few years, ranking among the fastest we've recorded on a consumer TV. LG OLEDs have been the first on the market to support 4K 120Hz Dolby Vision gaming, and the G5 continues this tradition. However, Dolby Vision Game Optimizer mode was still over-brightened versus PQ out of the box, so we would rather disable Dolby Vision for gaming on the Xbox Series X and just play in HDR10 with source-based tone mapping set correctly. Talking of which, HDRG support was well implemented on the G5. Hard clipping at 2500 nits for both maximum tone map luminance and maximum full frame tone map luminance to avoid subjecting compatible HDR games to unnecessary double tone mapping, paving the way for some truly stunning HDR gaming experience. Note that peak brightness in HDR Game Optimizer mode on our G5 review unit measured 2150 nits on a 10% window after calibration to D65 white point, causing the EOTF to slightly undertrack the PQ standard, which we hope can be rectified once CalMan AutoCal support is ready. The latest 4-stack WOLED panel delivers a wider color gamut and higher color luminance natively, eliminating the need for dynamic color boosting to paint brightly saturated colors even in HDR Game Optimizer mode. New for 2025, there is support for 165Hz refresh rate, although this needs to be engaged in the user menu by activating the 165Hz mode setting. Perhaps due to DSC being required for playing HDR games at 4K 165Hz, the HDMI video range auto detection did not seem to function correctly, meaning you may need to manually select the correct setting, full range in our case, to avoid a mismatch. The LG G5 supports all three mainstream VRR formats of HDMI Forum VRR, AMD FreeSync and NVIDIA G-Sync to deliver buttery-smooth gameplay without frame drops or tearing artifacts. VRR flicker was less noticeable, though still present in a handful of VRR games, especially during more sedate scenes and on static menus. You can experiment with the fine-tuned dark areas setting in the game dashboard to mitigate this at the expense of near-black gamma accuracy. The LG G5 would auto-detect a PC connection through one of its 4 HDMI 2.1 ports carrying 48 gigabits per second FRL and 24 gigabits per second DSC bandwidth, allowing the TV to reproduce full 444 chroma even at 4K 165Hz without needing to jump through hoops. In Game Optimizer or PC mode, many picture settings, including smooth gradation, would be grayed out or non-functional, so the G5 would have to fall back on its native 10-bit gradation, which wasn't as smooth as that seen on QD OLEDs, particularly near black. Design-wise, the 55 and 65-inch LG G5 models are available to purchase with an official tabletop stand included as part of the package, at least in the United Kingdom and other parts of Europe. Due to the absence of micro-lens array or MLA technology, the surface coating on the LG G5 was slightly glossier than that on last year's G4, but retained inkier blacks when hit by light. Audio quality was respectable, sounding more balanced and fuller to our ears than the Samsung S95F, though naturally a dedicated soundbar or home theater system should provide greater immersion and punchier bass. As can be seen from the edit, DTS audio codec support appeared to have been removed from the G5, making this aspect a downgrade from the G4. Let's sum up. The LG G5 delivers the most substantial upgrade in brightness and color we have seen so far from one OLED TV generation to the next, thanks in no small part to LG Display's latest, most advanced 4-stack WOLED panel. The luminance boost benefits not only small specular highlights, but also larger areas of high brightness, helping the G5 come ever closer to matching the HDR10 presentation of a Sony HX3110 reference monitor even in demanding high APL scenes. Together with an expansion of the color gamut to reach 83% of BT 2020 in UV terms, the extra brightness also imparts a positive effect on colors, allowing the LG G5 to reproduce WCG and brightly saturated colors in a more faithful manner. Of course, no TV is perfect, and native 10-bit gradation, especially near black, remains a shortcoming on the G5 OLED. So much so that LG Electronics felt compelled to apply a low level of debanding under the hood, even with smooth gradation turned off in the user menu, a practice we are not a fan of since it would scrub away some fine detail. One workaround to completely disable both smooth gradation and the always-on microcontrast enhancement is by switching to Game Optimizer mode, which surprisingly still handle 24p movies correctly without introducing telecinic judder, although the picture would look slightly softer and noisier as a trade-off. Nevertheless, taking into account its outstanding color accuracy, excellent video processing, impressive gaming credentials including low input lag, 4 full bandwidth HDMI 2.1 ports, multi-format VRR support, and accurate HGIG implementation that respects the creative intent, combined with the brightness and color gains afforded by the new 4-stack WOLED panel, the LG G5 earns our highly recommended award. Competition is extremely fierce this year, with Panasonic's flagship Z95B OLED featuring the same super bright panel bolstered by an advanced heat dissipation system, the Samsung S95F, which we've compared extensively side by side at the same screen size for a fair assessment of upscaling and motion, and last but not least, the new Sony model equipped with a QD OLED panel. If you can't decide on which TV to buy, one place where you can get good advice is at Richer Sounds, a trusted British AV retailer with more than 50 stores in the UK, who provides 6 years warranty on the vast majority of TVs if you join the company's VIP club. You will get the best deals through cheaper, VIP exclusive in-store-only prices, complimentary gifts or freebies, so go visit your local Richer Sounds store or call telesales for your next TV purchase. Thanks again for your support. Okay, if you have bought the LG G5, or indeed any other TV, there is a sneaky setting buried in the user menu that actually caps the light output, negating the benefits of 4-stack WOLED panel. To find out what the setting is and how to disable it, please watch my instruction video by clicking here.